I remember that evening in every detail. We were all sitting around a large table, celebrating another successful year for the company I had helped build. It wasn't just a family dinner, it was a moment of triumph. I saw my dad proudly tell the guests that this year, profits had doubled, that our company had become a leader in its industry. I sat there, a glass in my hand, and pride welled up inside me. It was my own doing. I had come to work in the family business while I was still in college. At first I just helped out, then I took over all the financial management, optimized costs, found new clients. I knew every number, every detail, every process. I was sure that when my dad decided to step down, he would hand the company over to me. And then he said these words. "We've made a decision." My father's voice was calm, even friendly. "Your brother will run the company." I didn't even realize right away what he had just said. "What?" I looked at him in confusion. "That's right," my mother added. "He's a man, he should run." I looked at my brother. He was sitting there, smiling smugly, as if it were something that went without saying. "But," I struggled to find my words. "I've been working here for so many years. I know the company inside out. I made it successful." My father sighed, as if I were a small child who didn't understand the obvious. "Sonny, you don't need to run the company. You need to find yourself a good husband and take care of your family. And business is not a woman's business." I felt as if ice water had been poured over me. My whole life, all my efforts, all my work, and it didn't mean anything just because I wasn't a man. I looked over at my brother. He was looking at me with the same expression he had had since childhood. "You'll always come second." But I wasn't going to stay in the shadows. I forced a smile and silently raised my glass. Little did they know that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I don't remember how I got to my room after that dinner. Everything inside me was boiling. Anger, resentment, humiliation. I gave this company 10 years of my life. I worked nights, went to meetings, negotiated when my father was tired or my brother was not interested. And now they just give everything to him. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to gather my thoughts. Okay, they decided that. Then I'll make a decision too. I won't leave empty-handed. Opening my laptop, I connected to the company system. All financial flows went through me. I knew which clients were the most profitable, which contracts were key, who was negotiating with major partners. I quickly wrote down the main contacts that were my merit. These people worked with us only because of me. Then the documents. I knew that the company had hidden financial risks that could become a real problem if anyone knew about them. For example, competitors. I began to feel a sense of justice. They decided to write me off. Okay, then I'll show them how much I'm really worth. I printed out all the necessary documents, copied the customer database, and in the morning, I submitted my resignation. The next morning I came downstairs, holding my resignation letter. The house was quiet. My brother was still asleep after another night of partying, and my parents were drinking their morning coffee in the kitchen, as usual, as if nothing had happened. I went into my father's office, put the letter on his desk, and said quietly, "I'm leaving." My father raised his head, looked at me over his glasses, sipped his coffee, and calmly replied, "It's your decision." No surprise, no attempts to stop me, as if everything was exactly as they had planned. "You don't even want to ask why," I clarified coldly. My father sighed, put down the newspaper, and finally looked me straight in the eye. "We knew you wouldn't agree with this decision. But this is a family business, and your brother should be the boss. You've always been smart, hardworking. You'll find a place for yourself." Those words were the final blow. Will I find a place for myself? I've already created that place. I've spent years proving my worth, and now I'm just being pushed aside. I nodded slowly, turned, and walked to the door. "And if it gets tough, you can always come back," my father said after me. I clenched my jaw. I'm never coming back. Taking my last breath in this house, I walked out without looking back. This was my final exit, and they didn't even realize that it wasn't the end. I left the family business, but that didn't mean I left my ambitions. The very day I left the office, I made a promise to myself. If they thought I would find my place, then I would decide where it would be. It was hard at first. I had the experience, but I didn't have the resources. I had to work twice as hard to start from scratch. I took up consulting, worked nights, and created my own business projects. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had no choice. Meanwhile, things weren't going as smoothly in the family business as they had expected. My brother, who had been handed the company on a silver platter, was completely unprepared for this responsibility. He didn't understand finances, made rash decisions, and hired friends for leadership positions instead of professionals. I learned that clients were losing trust, and key partners were going to competitors. One day, I ran into an old client in a coffee shop. He asked in surprise, "You don't work for the company anymore? We stopped working together after your brother took over. The level of service has dropped." I just smiled. "Not at all. I'm working on my own project." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Would you like to discuss a potential collaboration?" That was the moment I realized their failure would be my opportunity. They had kicked me out, thinking that I couldn't succeed without them. Now I didn't just have a chance to build my own business. I had a chance to take everything they thought was theirs. My business was growing faster than I could have imagined. While my brother's company was struggling, I was able to close several big deals with clients who had worked with us before. They didn't need names or family connections. They needed quality and stability, and they knew I could guarantee that. I worked nonstop. Days turned into nights, but the fatigue was pleasant. Each signed contract, each successful project proved that I was no longer a secondary figure in my brother's shadow. Meanwhile, news about my brother's company reached me on its own. My parents still believed that he would pull through. "It's just a difficult period," they told their friends. "These are temporary difficulties," they excused his mistakes. But the numbers don't lie. Profits were falling. Experienced employees were quitting because they couldn't work under his leadership. And most importantly, investors who had once trusted the company began to look for alternatives. One day I received an unexpected call. "Hello." My brother's voice was quiet, uncertain. "We need to talk." I raised my cup of coffee to my lips and barely held back a smile. "Of course," I answered calmly. "About what exactly?" "About business." I knew this moment would come, but I was in no hurry to help him. I wanted him to feel the same way I felt. I wanted him to finally understand the value of real work. The next day we met at a small cafe near my office. My brother looked nothing like I remembered him. His confidence had evaporated. His suit, which had always been so perfectly tailored, looked rumpled, his eyes looked tired, and his movements lacked the confidence he always displayed in front of me. I sat down across from him and calmly sipped my coffee. "So," I said, setting down my cup. He nervously twirled the spoon in his hands. "You know I'm having problems right now," he began. I didn't answer, letting him continue. "Investors, they're refusing to invest. Suppliers are raising prices. Some of the customers have left." He paused, avoiding my gaze. "Can you help?" "Help?" I repeated, leaning closer. "What exactly?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose with his fingers. You're doing it. I know your business is growing. You could invest. Support the company." I could tell I wanted to laugh, but I remained serious. "Invest? In what exactly?" He looked at me, confused. "In the company," he answered as if it were obvious. "So you're suggesting I invest my money in a business that has lost almost everything in the last year?" He didn't immediately find what to say. "These are temporary difficulties," he muttered. "The same temporary difficulties that were considered unimportant when they gave you the entire inheritance." I calmly reminded him. My brother frowned, but quickly regained his stubbornness. "Look, it's just business. There's no point in holding a grudge. We're family after all." "Family?" I raised an eyebrow. "Remember, family is about supporting each other, not taking advantage of someone when it's convenient." His silence told me he hadn't expected me to take that tone. But I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago. I was going to teach him a lesson he would remember for a long time. My brother was silent, clearly not expecting such resistance. Accustomed to getting everything without effort, he didn't understand that this time everything would be different. I calmly took a sip of coffee, enjoying the moment. "Okay," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "Let's consider the option where I help you." He immediately raised his head. Hope appeared in his eyes. "Really?" I nodded, enduring a pause. "But on one condition." He became wary. "I'm listening." I leaned closer and, without looking away, clearly said, I will become the head of the company. His face changed dramatically. His eyes widened, his lips pressed tightly together. What? He croaked, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. You heard me, I replied coldly. I will invest my money, rebuild the company, make it profitable. But from now on, only I will make the decisions. Are you kidding me? He laughed nervously. This is my company. No. I sat up straight in my chair. This is the company that was given to you. The company that you brought to ruin. And now you have come to ask for my help. He opened his mouth, but I did not give him the opportunity to object. If you want to save the business, you sign the documents. If not, look for investors who will invest in your failed project. His eyes were shining with rage, but I saw something else, fear. He realized that he had no choice. For the first time in his life, he found himself in a position where he would have to give in. You have no right to treat me like this, he hissed. I smiled. Did you have the right to take my inheritance away? There was a long pause. His fingers nervously clenched the napkin. I knew victory was near. My brother sat in silence, torn between pride and despair. He was never used to giving in, least of all to me. But this time he had no choice. I watched calmly as he examined the documents I had placed before him. That's ridiculous, he growled, angrily flipping through the pages. Give you control. You just took advantage of my weakness. I shrugged. This is business, brother. You had the opportunity to run the company, and you bankrupted it. Now I will. His eyes were burning with rage. What if I refuse? I leaned across the table, looking him straight in the eye. Then you lose everything. I paused, letting him consider his options. You can remain stubborn and go completely bankrupt. Or accept reality, give me the reins, and watch the company rise again. He clenched his fists. You've always wanted this, haven't you? Always been waiting for the moment to bring me to my knees. I leaned closer, keeping my composure. No, I said, my voice even. I just want justice. His face was red with anger, but he said nothing. I handed him the pen. There was a tense silence. His hands shook as he finally took it. I'll never forgive you for this, he whispered, signing. I smiled with satisfaction. Oh, I didn't expect that. At that moment, I realized it was official now. I had what was mine back. The signature hadn't even dried when the office door opened and our parents burst into the room. There was panic in their eyes. What's going on? My mother quickly walked over to my brother, grabbing his hand. Why do you look like you've lost everything? My father walked over to the table and stared at the documents. Is this a joke? His voice was low and threatening. I calmly looked up. No, this is not a joke. I am now the official owner of the company. This must be a mistake. My father abruptly pulled the papers out of my brother's hands, looking through them as if hoping to find some kind of trap. That's true. My brother leaned back in his chair. His voice was bitter. She's in charge now. My mother looked at me sharply. How could you? This is family. I smiled coldly. Oh, now I'm suddenly part of the family? It's strange that when you shared the inheritance, I wasn't counted among them. Mother paled. We thought it would be better this way. Better for who? I interrupted. For the brother you've put above me since childhood. For you, because it was easier for you to support him than to admit that your daughter was worth something too. Father leaned back on the table, sighing heavily. We didn't think you'd go against us. I crossed my arms over my chest. You didn't think I had the strength to do what was right. There was silence. I saw their reality crumble. They had lost everything. And most importantly, they had lost me. My mother sat down in a chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. My father paced the office, clutching his head nervously. What now? He finally muttered, looking at me. Are you just going to leave us with nothing? I went to the window, looked out at the city that spread out before me. Once I had been a little girl, considered my brother's shadow. Now I was the one in control. You left yourself with nothing, I answered in a flat voice. You made your choice when you decided I didn't deserve the inheritance. When you gave everything to him. My brother buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I thought you would just forgive me, that we could work things out. I turned to him. Take control. After everything. After you spent all your money on your own whims, and I worked day and night to survive. His eyes met mine. I was a fool. I didn't know you were so strong. I moved closer and leaned closer to him. You should know. My father clenched his hands into fists. We're family. I shot him a piercing look. You didn't mention that when you left me with nothing. There was a long silence. They finally understood. They lost. I took a deep breath. The company is mine now, and I'll run it however I see fit. My brother raised his head. Does that mean there's no place for me here anymore? I looked at him, coldly, firmly. You ruined your own chance. He understood. His parents understood. This was their payback. The next morning I went into the office, but it was oppressively quiet. Usually, there was the hum of telephone conversations, the rustling of documents, the muffled gurgling of coffee in the machine. But today, silence. My employees looked at me warily. They knew something had happened, that I was no longer just the owner's daughter, but the person who actually ran everything. I walked into my father's office. Once it had been his space, the big, solid wood desk, the expensive paintings on the walls, the chair that had always seemed too bulky to me. Now it was my office. The door opened. My father and brother walked in together. My brother looked confused, exhausted. My father was angry. We need to talk, he said in a tone that was still trying to sound authoritative. I sat down calmly at the desk. Talk. My brother looked around nervously, as if he couldn't believe he was standing here not as an heir but as a supplicant. We made a mistake, he began. I understand that now. But you're not just going to leave us, are you? His voice was shaking. My father clenched his hands into fists. I've dedicated my whole life to this business, he said. I can't just leave. I leaned forward, crossing my fingers in front of me. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a conscious decision. You decided I was worthless, that I didn't deserve this. You gave everything to your brother because he was your only heir. My father pursed his lips, and my brother turned away again. I'm offering you a choice, I said, leaning closer. You can leave gracefully, peacefully. I will pay you enough money to start over, buy yourself a modest house, and provide for your old age. My father glared at me. You're kicking me out of my own company. I stood up. This is not your company anymore. My words hung in the air. My brother looked as if he had just been hit. Or, I added calmly, you can stay, but not in a management position. You will obey the new management. No control. No decisions. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. This is your last chance. There was a long, painful pause. My brother nodded. I agree, he said quietly. My father looked at him with contempt. Are you serious? My brother shrugged. I've already lost. This is at least some chance of staying. I waited. Father sighed heavily. You have no choice, I said. You either accept it or be left with nothing. His hands were shaking. He wanted to throw himself into hysterics, but he understood that he had lost everything. Okay, he said through gritted teeth. I accept the terms. I smiled. A wise decision. They lowered their heads. That was the moment when I finally won. I signed the last few papers, confirming all the changes. My father and brother had officially lost their management positions. Now the company belonged to me, completely. The first few days were tense. My father walked around the office, muttering something under his breath, sometimes snapping at his employees. He still thought he had power. But very quickly, everyone understood. This was a new reality. I didn't get my revenge on them completely. I didn't put them out on the street. I didn't turn them into beggars. No. I just made them go through what I went through. Are you really leaving me here as an ordinary employee? My brother asked one evening when we were alone in the office. I looked at him. Yes. He laughed nervously. You're kidding, right? No. He was silent. If you want to work here, work. But without privileges. You will receive a salary, not unlimited access to the company accounts. No expensive cars, no pointless investments. But he paused, realizing that it was pointless to argue. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and continued working. Welcome to the real world, I threw over my shoulder. The next day, my father did not show up for work. He quit on his own. I knew that his pride would not allow him to remain in a secondary role in the company that he considered his. Well, it was his choice, and I could finally breathe freely. This was my victory.